Welcome to Between Drinks, a podcast where we travel the world one drink at a time. I'm your host, Caro Griffin, a mezcal sommelier, traveling bartender, and your guide through the world of really great drinks. If you've been here since the beginning, hello again, and genuinely, thank you. If you're new, no need to start from the top. But just so you know, we've already been to Mexico and Japan, and the drinks, they've been exceptional. This season, we're heading somewhere a little grayer, a little rainier, a place where, I promise you, the drinks more than make up for the weather. We're going to the UK. I started this trip in London, a city with a surprisingly complicated relationship with its most famous spirit, before making my way up and all around Scotland, which is not subtle about the fact that it invented the world's most celebrated whiskey. And if there's ever one word that keeps coming up across all of it, it's craft. What it means, who gets to claim it, and why right now, of all moments, it feels more important than ever. Let's dive in.
So gin is a really fascinating spirit because you can go all over the world and find slightly different definitions. But I am based in the UK and I go by the EU definition, which states that a gin is an unaged spirit that is predominantly flavoured with juniper and can have the lowest ABV that it can have is 37.5%. And that is gin.
That's Dr. Anne Brock, the Master Distiller at Bombay Sapphire, and she's going to be our guide through the world of London dry gin today. Now, I'll be honest. Before this trip, gin was not the spirit I would have told you I was most excited to learn about. I drink it, I like it, but when I picture great craft spirits, my mind usually goes somewhere else first. Mezcal, single malts, something with a story attached. But spending time in London changes that. Because gin is everywhere here. In the bars, obviously, but also in the history, the culture, the national identity in a way that's hard to fully appreciate until you really start digging in. And once you start pulling on that thread, you realize gin's story is also London's story. The boom, the fall from grace, the long comeback, they've been through it all together. First things first, gin didn't actually start in England. It started in the Netherlands. In the 17th century, Dutch apothecaries were distilling a juniper-based spirit called jenever. Gin, jenever, I think you see where we're going here. Partly for its supposed medicinal properties, but let's be honest, mainly because it tasted good and got you drunk, which was a more reliable cure for most ailments at the time. English soldiers fighting alongside Dutch troops started drinking it, and as the story goes, a quick swig before battle became known as Dutch courage. They brought the habit back home with them, and when a Dutch-born king took the British throne in 1689, he accelerated things considerably. His government loosened restrictions on domestic distilling almost overnight, and production absolutely exploded. And then London lost its mind. By the 1720s and the 1730s, gin was being produced everywhere, much of it cheap, unregulated, and genuinely dangerous. There are accounts of gin being sold out of wheelbarrows, of one gin shop for every 5 to 10 houses. Parliament tried taxing it, licensing it, banning it. None of it worked. Eventually, a mix of rising grain prices, higher taxes, and shifting public opinion did slow things down. And as production became more regulated, distillers started actually caring about what they were making. The big turning point came in the 19th century when new distilling technology, specifically the column still, allowed for a much purer, cleaner spirit. No added sugars, no artificial flavors, nothing added after distillation. That style became what we now call London Dry. And the reason gin survived all of that, I think Anne puts it best.
Well, I think it's gin is such an incredible spirit because it is so versatile. It is also because of the slightly loose definition of it just must be flavoured predominantly with juniper. There is a huge variety of gins out there on the market, which is incredible because it means there's a gin for everybody out there. I truly believe that everybody will find a gin they love.
But as loose as the definition of gin is, it's also really strict in a way. You can make it different ways. You can throw in literally anything, but it still has to taste, and I quote, predominantly of juniper. And so it's incredibly strict on one hand and incredibly loose on the other. And maybe there's something to be said about London being the same way.
So there's a number of different ways you can make gin, but then it'll sort of determine what kind of gin you've made. So the main two types of gin are compounded gin or distilled gin. So if I start with compounded is a super easy way to make it. It's not very easy to get it consistent, but essentially you take those juniper berries and any other botanicals you want. And by botanicals, I mean citrus fruits, I mean flowers, I mean nuts, I mean spices. But as long as the predominant flavor of juniper is coming through, you can put anything else you want in there. So you take all those botanicals and you put them in a high-proof vodka. You leave it to sit for a little while, and obviously it starts to extract the flavors and the colors into the vodka. You filter off the botanicals, and you have gin. So it's very, very simple. You can also make a compound gin more recently by using flavors from a laboratory. So as long as juniper is the predominant flavor, you can just mix them with a high-proof vodka, and technically you have a gin.
That feels like cheating.
It's so cheating.
Okay, I'm glad we agree. I was like, is that a faux pas to say? I can't, knowing what I know about you, I can't imagine you're a fan of that as either.
I'm a big fan of doing some distillation, and that's where distilled gins come in. So the vast majority of gins out on the market are distilled gins. There are a number of different ways you can distill them, so I'll go into that in a minute. But essentially, a distilled gin, you take all the botanicals, you take your high-proof vodka. At some point in the distillation process, the botanicals meet the vodka, whether that's in the still or in a vapor basket. And the extraction happens, is distilled over, condensed, collected, and that's your distilled gin. Now, for a distilled gin, you can then go on to add fruit flavorings, you can add sugar, you can add colorings. So post-distillation, you can add things and it will still be a distilled gin. The type of gin where you can't add anything post-distillation is London dry gin, and that's that whole category of sort of, it's almost like a marker of quality. It's the most heavily controlled from a production process type of gin that there is. Doesn't need to be made in London, but what it does say is that all the flavouring of the alcohol must be done in that distillation. So you cannot add any flavours or sugar after distillation.
So to put that simply, compounded gin is basically made just like tea. And there's a joke there somewhere, I swear. But yeah, you steep your botanicals in alcohol, no distillation required. Distilled gin, on the other hand, runs everything through a still. And London Dry is the most strictly regulated version of distilled gin, the one where nothing gets added after the fact. Which brings us to exactly how Bombay Sapphire pulls that off.
Now, distillation can be done in a number of ways, and the two main ways you can distill is either by something called steep and boil or by vapor. And so steep and boil is where the botanicals start by sitting in that ethanol. So a bit like the compounded gin, but this happens in the still. You start to extract some of those flavors. You can leave it for macerate for a little period of time. Then when you're ready to start the distillation, you distill it. The ethanol vapor and the flavors distill together over and are collected as gin. Vapor infusion, which is what we do at Bombay Sapphire, is a little bit different. We don't put botanicals into the still. We actually have a vapor chamber just before the condenser. So we boil the ethanol and it becomes a vapor. That vapor passes over and into what we call our vapor chamber. It's basically this giant copper cylinder with these baskets with our botanicals layered in them in a very specific order. And the vapor passes into the bottom of the chamber, passes up through the botanicals, and that is where the magic happens, as I like to say, and we extract the flavors. And then that goes over to the condenser and is condensed and collected as gin. Convoluted paragraph, that is what gin.
No, not convoluted at all. I'm like, again, so clear. No, I was obviously lucky enough to get to see the production and the baskets, and it was so cool to see you made a point to say that it's like a particular order and everything, and it is. It reminds me of those mise en place, like perfectly organized layout of things. It's kind of like that, but like layered botanicals. And there's something really beautiful in these old, well-used baskets. I was like, oh, there's something really lovely about this, to see the craft at such a scale, because Bombay obviously is a huge scale.
Well, that's the thing. It's a big brand, but it's a small team that makes it. And I think we've got a team of 9 distillers plus some support staff. So when you think of the Bombay Sapphire you find all over the world, I can pick up a bottle and, trace it back to the distillers that have made it, which is something that I do actually quite like doing. And, loading the botanicals can't be done by machines. It has to be done by hand. So there is a real element of crafting to it, just because you don't have to be small to be craft.
As soon as Anne said this, that you don't have to be small to be craft, I was like, ooh, there's a good pull quote. And one I want to double click into a bit. The word craft came up constantly when making this season. Sometimes with people who wear it proudly, and sometimes with people who roll their eyes at it. And both reactions make sense. It's vague, it's unregulated, it gets slapped on things that don't deserve it, but it's also the best word we've got. When I say craft, what I mean is that it's made with care, with intention, and with some kind of purpose. Sometimes that's a big purpose, like preserving native corn that's been around for thousands of years and is at risk of extinction. Please see the Mexican whiskey episode. And sometimes it's just making a good drink in a way that doesn't harm the planet, the people making it, or the community it comes from. Small and independent can signal similar things, but they don't guarantee it. Big doesn't disqualify you, and small doesn't guarantee anything. And so something I found myself thinking a lot about this year is the balance between craft and capitalism, how it's like balancing in the middle of a teeter-totter that will never find equilibrium. But does that mean we should stop teetering and just pick a side? Nah. The people doing that balancing act are often the most interesting ones, and often the most sustainable from a business standpoint and an environmental one. I'd rather support them. Which brings me back to Anne, who kind of makes this argument for me. Because even at a brand as big as Bombay Sapphire, they still load those botanical baskets by hand. And there still isn't a machine that can replace a well-trained human nose. You're responsible for making sure every bottle of Bombay Sapphire gin smells and tastes like it's supposed to at these huge quantities. So are you just taking very small tastes of gin all day, every day? Or tell us a little bit about what goes into that quality control.
I mean, yes, there's an element of, obviously, that is my, the buck stops with me, as it were, for quality. But for any spirit or any distillery, you can't just rely on one nose, because I could have a cold. I do go on holiday. I sometimes get to go abroad to places like the Athens Bar Show.
I'm glad to hear it.
So, I think I can't be around all the time. And so my distillers are all trained to do it. And we actually have a panel of nosing of people who knows. And every single batch is checked by that panel. It then goes up to our bottling line, and we have another nosing panel up at the bottling line who are also trained on gin. So there's a large number of noses that knows the liquid before it gets into the
liquid. I do love that you're calling them noses. Puns. There's something really lovely about that and quaint about it.
It's the technical term, and it only sounds silly when you're outside of the distillery and people are looking at you slightly strange. But it is, my background as a chemist, I came into gin thinking, there must be some kind of lab equipment that I could use that would tell me that the gin was perfect. And I started in a small brand, so definitely didn't have the money there. And when I moved to Bombay, I was super excited to see what they had in the labs. And we do have a lot of technology. We're very, very lucky, particularly in our botanical labs in Geneva, where our Master of Botanicals, Alessandro Garneri, sits. But to this day, I always like to say I've had 2 samples of Bombay Sapphire that from a gas chromatography machine look identical. And you can pick up a difference on the human nose. There is nothing as powerful as the human nose, which is really quite remarkable when you think of everything that machines and AI and robots can do today. They can't beat a well-trained nose.
What a relevant conversational turn this took. And it goes back to the layering the botanicals in the basket. A machine can't do that, right? The machine can't tell you what your nose can tell you, which is something is a little off here. And that goes back to that craftness, right? Around like we can AI a lot of things, but
Not
craft
that.
is still
Yeah,
craft.
exactly. There's still skill sets that's needed in the world. Maybe not, I mean, I love it when AI writes me an email, but the rest of the true craft, the true skills are still going to be needed.
Obviously, you have a few different expressions, but that classic Bombay Sapphire is Bombay Sapphire. And that consistency, I think, also is an undervalued aspect of craft that just like doesn't get enough recognition. That like part of craft is finding that consistency consistently. Like you said, being able to pick up that bottle anywhere in the world and know what it's going to taste like.
It tastes the same. Yeah. So much of that work gets done with the botanicals because every single botanical is a natural ingredient. So we all are very happy understanding that wine goes through different vintages because the harvest of the grape will change depending on the weather. But we seem to expect, despite the fact there are 10 different in Bombay Sapphire natural ingredients, it's got to taste the same each time. So there's a huge amount of work that goes into ensuring consistency of botanical supplies. So Alessandro works directly with the growers and harvesters of those botanicals to ensure that we get that consistency. He's got an incredible team in Geneva who also work very hard on that. And then once it comes to me in the distillery, we have 4 stills and they all have their own personalities. So the liquid comes off, or the Bombay Sapphire comes off tasting slightly different each time. Not hugely, no one's going to notice, but each little still's got a characteristic, and then we blend those away. So there's a lot of blending, there's a lot of monitoring, there's a lot of trend following and analysis that goes in to that bottle of Bombay Sapphire tasting it as exactly as you would like it to be.
I really love that Anne made this comparison with wine because it's so true. We're happy to excuse differences between the same type of wine year over year. We even expect it. That's part of what makes wine special. You have to embrace the ephemera of it all to some degree and appreciate the bottle in front of you without knowing if you'll ever be able to taste it again. But gin? I want it to taste exactly the same this year in Mexico as it did last year in London and 10 years ago when I first had it in Chicago. And that's totally fair too. But it's also part of the art or craft that gets overlooked in distillation, especially in clear spirits like gin, which don't have the same terroir claims that some other spirits do. But Bombay Sapphire is made with 10 different botanicals, all harvested or collected from different regions around the world. There are juniper berries, obviously, and as Anne said, they can't be cultivated. They only grow wild and they have to be foraged. Not exactly an efficient and easily scalable process. But her gin also includes lemon peel, coriander seeds, a couple types of root, and almonds, all collected from different places in Europe. And then there's the ingredients that come from Asia, like cassia bark and licorice and a certain type of berries, and even grains of paradise from Ghana. But more than the country of origin, what's important is the hyper-specific flavor profile of each of these botanicals, which is a distinction growing in importance right alongside the severity of global warming. Because those berries from one place that tasted a certain way 10 years ago, they may not taste the same way today because of the way our climate is changing. Hell, they may not even be around soon.
It is obviously changing things and impacting anything that's grown wherever it is in the world at the moment. And it's really a big part of what our Master of Botanicals, Alessandro Garneri, does. He has these incredible relationships with our suppliers, and that is so important because they can give him early warning of any issues, of any harvest changes, because there's a lot of fluctuation we're seeing year on year in different parts of the world that has a big impact. I think the biggest challenge the industry will have is our key ingredient, juniper. It grows wild and is foraged. And it grows wild. Nobody cultivates this stuff. And it grows across many, many countries, particularly in Europe. But obviously, if something is grown wild and then foraged, you can't control the growing conditions. You can't mitigate any droughts or, the floods or anything. You can't step in and take any decisions around the growing practices because it's wild. And yet it is our key ingredient. So it's going to be a really fascinating few years, I think, for the gin industry. It's going to give Alessandro lots of headaches, I'm sure, but he really is in the best situation because of those relationships he has, because he can assist and impact and help them make decisions around what they're doing in a really positive way that helps the farmers, but also, obviously ensures a great quality supply for us.
I guess I did know it was wild, but yeah, I hadn't thought about that in terms of global warming and made that connection of like, wow, the most important ingredient is going to be the biggest challenge. So, and I do love that you weren't like, oh, damn. You were like, so it's going to be really fun. It's going to be really interesting.
Well, it's because I can rely on Alessandro to deal with it all. Yeah. And I'll just be like, thanks for juniper.
Thanks. Smells great.
Exactly.
Thanks for all that work you did over there.
Gin.
Oh, I love that, poor Alessandro. But yeah, no, fun challenges all around.
Yeah. But it's what I mean, most people are passionate about climate change, but it's something that's really important to me as a person, and I know to Alessandro and to the brand, because it will have such a big impact on what we do.
Cool job alert, by the way. I don't know what Alessandro's LinkedIn title says, but Master of Botanicals is a hell of a gig. And regardless of what botanicals and other raw ingredients you're using, distillation is an energy-intensive process in general. So let's talk a little bit more about that. I know you and the team have been prioritizing sustainability in recent years, and I just, at the distillery, heard a story about a light bulb moment you had regarding water usage while you were straightening your hair, I believe you said.
Oh, no. Who told you that?
I cannot reveal my sources. And so maybe if you could tell us about that and any other initiatives you're doing over there.
Yeah, it's remarkable, isn't it? Because I often find once you're at work and you're on site, you're dealing with the immediacy of everything. And sometimes your best ideas come when you're on a walk or in a shower. It just so happened, it was early morning and I was straightening my hair before I went to work. And I can't tell you why I was thinking about it. But obviously we run this distillation process called vapor infusion. So none of the botanicals go into the still. So at the end of the distillation, you've got majority water, a small amount of grain neutral spirit left in the still, and everything else is distilled over and become gin. Now, before, we were draining that away as faints and just recycling it with the rest of our sort of heads and tails. And for some reason, it popped into my head, but this is clean. We don't need to do that. And it's majority water because we drain it and then we put more ethanol and water back into the still. So we retain those now. So at the end of distillation, we discard the heads and tails and keep what's left in the still. And it saves us a huge amount of water every year, which it was such a simple idea. But often you need those moments where you're sort of not really thinking for the simple ideas to come. The obvious ones are sometimes the hardest ones to see. But it's just really a testament to the way my team thinks about sustainability. And, they're thinking about improvements in the production process all the time, because everything they do that improves the production process helps me maintain quality of the liquid. And it also allows us to hit some quite tough sustainability targets that we're all facing over the next few years.
I think, too, it's like when you are part of what feels like, a bigger, not literally a big team, but like a bigger organization, and you have these resources, you're like, surely someone would have thought about it if we could do that. There is a little bit of this assumedness, and like you said, sometimes you have to be in the shower, you have to disconnect, you have to like let it kind of float over you versus sitting at a desk,
And also, I came into the team when the site had been operating for a little while. So they'd been through the whole commissioning of the site, getting the site running, getting the Bombay Sapphire tasting great. And I hadn't been there for that. So I came in with fresh eyes while they were, sort of getting used to the day-to-day, having gone through this really anyone who's done an opening of a bar or commissioned any type of technology understands the stressful nature of that. And I just got to swan in at the end and notice things. So it was good for me. But I think sometimes having fresh eyes on something is really helpful.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And there's that old adage for a reason of like, if you do things the way you've always done them, you're going to get what you've always gotten. And sometimes that's really nice. And sometimes that gets us in the situation we're in now, where we need to be very mindful of every bit of water and, waste that we're doing. And it was cool to see some of the small tweaks at the distillery that are having those bigger impacts.
Yeah, we're really proud. I mean, one of the ones that we've done recently is send all our spent botanicals away for anaerobic digestion, which is a really cool way of disposing of biomatter because it creates biomethane.
Mm-hmm.
And you can either use that biomethane or you can use that gas to turn a turbine and make electricity. So it's creating electricity out of our spent botanicals, which has been a great project that one of my team was working on.
They did tell me this, and something else that also came up was that the recycling of the heads and tails sometimes goes into like industrial usage, like even like windshield wiper fluid or something. And I just love the idea of like someone unknowingly, like someone who maybe is a big Bombay Sapphire gin drinker, like using windshield wiper fluid, having no idea it comes from their favorite gin, like their power of their home coming from Bombay Sapphire.
I mean, but I think that's, it would not be recognisably Bombay Sapphire, but I do think there's that some joy and sort of in that completeness of circularity.
Totally.
I like that, and hopefully we'll see more of that from all industries over the coming years.
All of this care, the spent botanicals, the water savings, the team of 9 people loading baskets by hand, it's happening at a moment when gin is figuring out what its next chapter looks like. The boom years are behind it, but it's not done growing. And what comes next is a more interesting question.
10 years ago? What date are we now? Yeah, 10, 12 years ago, there was a real boom in gin in the UK. The UK's always been a big gin drinking country. But we saw the rise of craft distilleries, and a lot of craft distilleries make gin as they're going on to make whiskey because the gin doesn't need to be aged, so you can start selling it immediately. And it's also incredibly versatile. You can create your own flavor profile quite quickly by using unique botanicals. And so we saw this real rise in the number of gins on the market and the amount of gin that was being drunk. And it was sort of seen, particularly in the UK and Spain. There's been in Australia as well, this sort of rise in appreciation. And that has plateaued a bit now. What we're seeing is people are, certainly the flavoured gins are seeing less growth, and people are sort of returning to much more classically flavoured London dries like Bombay Sapphire, which is great. They're what most of the cocktails that you see in a cocktail book were made on. It wasn't anything that had sugar or strawberry syrup in it. So I think that's really great for the industry. Gin is still growing. It's not quite growing at the double digits we were seeing a few years ago, but it's still in a really strong place. And if you go to places like, say, North America, it's one of the biggest markets by volume for gin. But actually, if you look at its market share, it's really tiny. I think it's only vermouths and bitters that are lower than gin in the market share in North America. It's about 3% of the overall spirits market was the last stat I saw, which means there's a huge amount of room for growth. And I think it's always been a spirit that hasn't been as appreciated in North America as in other parts of the world, but I'm fully confident that is changing and that people are really getting to understand and love and enjoy drinking gin cocktails. So that's really exciting. And we only need a few more North Americans to start drinking gin, and I'm going to be quite busy.
Well, great. I mean, I think the vast majority of the people listening to the podcast are in North America. So, guys,
okay, get drinking gin, please.
Great. The doctor has spoken. We have our assignments. So I'm shocked that it's 3% or anything close to that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was last June I saw that stat or something.
Okay.
So it may well have changed, but it's still very, relatively to the size of the overall spirits market, it's still very, very small.
Yeah.
So there's a huge amount of room for growth because of the versatility of it. Like I said, there's a gin for everybody.
Absolutely. No, and I take your view where I'm like, oh, that's exciting news. I mean, even if you get to 6%, that's double the that's a huge.
We would be in trouble. She's
like, okay, maybe not that much,
amount of volume. Yeah. Just a little bit. Go slowly, please.
Slowly. Let's ramp it up, okay? Let's just slowly ramp up our gin usage so Anne has time to catch up production. But all right, well, we'll get on that. Now, to be clear, Anne is describing the market as it stands today, post-boom. But for a while there, gin was having a moment. Part of what drove it was the craft cocktail revival happening at the same time. Bartenders were reaching back into classic recipes, the Negroni, the Martini, the Gimlet, and realizing that a more interesting gin made for a more interesting drink. And gin, with its huge flavor range and that one rule to rule them all juniper requirement, turned out to be the perfect playground. You could make it floral or citrusy or spiced or even almost savory, and it would still work in a cocktail. So you had bartenders wanting more interesting gins and distillers wanting to make them. Especially all these new whiskey upstarts who were sitting on their hands while they waited for their first batch of whiskey to age for 3 years. What could they do in the meantime? They could make gin and sell it almost immediately. This caused hundreds of new distilleries to open up. There were new botanicals, new flavor profiles, gins in almost literally every color of the rainbow. It felt like the whole category was in startup mode. And Anne was there for the beginning of all of it.
It was exciting. It was amazing. There was a real energy. There were lots of people sort of starting out around the same time. And so there was a lot of people I could turn to and talk to and have as my support network, most of whom I'm still in touch with today, which is great. But also it was incredible because the production side of any spirits is a lot more collegiate than, say, the sales and marketing, where it's obviously incredibly
competitive. That is such a nice way of putting it. Collegiate. I like. Feels like a very British turn of phrase too. Collegiate.
I was trying to think of the right word. Yeah. That feels like the right word. And I came in as this woman who'd never distilled gin, drunk a lot of gin in my time, but never distilled it. And I distilled a lot of things in labs, as a chemist. But again, you didn't drink what I distilled back then. That would have been a problem. So I went through, I started to try and learn as much as I could about how to make gin. And I was incredibly sort of blown away by the number of people. So, for instance, Charles Maxwell at Thames Distillers, he was making the gins that I was building a distillery for at the time, and I was going to take production off him. That was my goal. And he just invited me down to the distillery, and his team taught me how to distill and how to make gin. And it's incredible that on this side we're very supportive and we help each other, and it's a very welcoming industry. I often get asked what it was like as a woman entering the industry, and it was a little bit of an old boys club, but it was a very welcoming one. It wasn't that they were shutting people out. It was just, as soon as I knocked on the door, they welcomed me with open arms. So it was a really great time to join the industry, become part of the gin world. I joined the Gin Guild and became a board member of Gin Guild. And that's just given me the ability to really connect and be a leader in the industry and represent a category that I really feel strongly about. And I think now it's not quite where we were back in 2013 in terms of there are a lot more pressures across the system. There are a lot more challenges. We all know what happened over the last 5-6 years, which hasn't made life any easier for any distillery, no matter what the size. But because we have this incredible sort of group or incredible relationship between the different brands and between the different gin producers, I feel like we can support each other and we continue to learn and grow. It's tricky times for some brands right now, but I really do feel that gin is only going to get stronger and keep growing. Would I do what I did back in 2013 today? Probably not. But maybe that's just because I'm less innocent and wide-eyed and I know more about the industry. I don't know. But it's still a wonderful place to work and a wonderful industry to be part of.
I came to London not totally sure what to expect from gin. I've had a lot of it over the years, especially in cocktails, but I'm a terroir person, And isn't gin just juniper-flavored vodka? Well, I hope this episode shows that it's a little more than that. Gin has a long, colorful history. It nearly destroyed a city, if you believe some accounts. It survived some of the worst regulation by panic in drinks history. It had a massive revival, a bit of a hangover, and now it's quietly finding its footing again, led in large part by people like Anne who actually care about what's in the bottle. And I think that's the part that stuck with me most from our conversation. Not the craft of the distillation, impressive as that is, but the care behind it. The team of 9 distillers or so who load those botanical baskets by hand. The botanist in Geneva who tracks juniper harvest across Europe. The fact that no machine can replace a well-trained human nose. That's not a small thing. It's also at an inflection point. On one hand, lots of opportunity and growth that's possible. And on the other hand, a changing climate changing the botanicals that really define gin. And to take Anne's optimistic outlook on things, it's going to be a really fascinating few years. One small postscript worth mentioning. Since we recorded this conversation, Anne has actually left Bombay Sapphire after about a decade as their master distiller. She hasn't announced what's next yet, but if this episode is any indication of how she thinks about gin, I imagine it'll still be in that world and very much worth paying attention to. That's it for our first deep dive of Season 3. Thank you so much for listening. And a huge thank you to Dr. Anne Brock for her time. You can find links to connect with her and the distillery in the show notes. That link is betweendrinks.co/drygin. Next week, we're heading north to Edinburgh, Scotland, and we're tackling the most misunderstood category in Scotch, the blend. If you enjoyed this episode, you can subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to make sure you don't miss it. And if you want even more from the show and from me, check out the newsletter. The subscribe link is in the show notes. That same link, betweendrinks.co/drygin. It's genuinely the best place to follow along on everything that doesn't make it into an episode. For example, while releasing this season, I'm already on a road trip working on the next one. So I'd love to have you along for that. You can subscribe at that same link, betweendrinks.co/drygin. See you next week for the train ride up north.